Hello, guys. Jerry Learns Business. I got a very special guest. This is Daniel Rubin. He is currently senior editor of the I-Team at Philadelphia Inquirer, but before that, he's worked abroad, been a Berlin chief columnist, and he's also been a professor at University of Pennsylvania, my school. He's also worked local journalism, and on top of that, if you go to his Twitter, he's gone to med school before, right? If I'm not, or not med school, is it a journalism school, Midwestern Middle?
Okay, so Medill is the journalism school at Northwestern University. So after
That's a really good school, but I lived in Evanston, so like
yeah,
I heard Medill. I was like, why does this sound familiar? Wow, okay, lots of like connections we have just with Life Journey.
yeah. So at the end of college, I needed something to do, and so I stuck around for a year and got a journalism degree. And it was useful because turns out I didn't know how to write before that, having gone all the way through Northwestern. It still it was a helpful thing to learn how to write at the end of that.
Yeah. Wow. Did the journalism degree at Northwestern help you land your first journalism gig? I think that's always like a question that people have for journalism.
By the end of there was this, because I was late coming to it.
Mhm.
I took at the very end of college, I took a course with a bunch of freshman women in the journalism school, my first course, and I rocked it. They basically showed me what I didn't know how to do and helped put together my thoughts,
Mhm.
so someone would know what was going on in this head. And then I stayed and did that program, but because I didn't really have any experience, there was this 11-week boot camp at Northwestern, and there were a bunch of really smart people who didn't have experience either. And by the end of that period, I was just loaded for bear. I mean, it was so intense. It just really stripped you down, and it was almost like a Marine boot camp. You were just ready to go. So by the time I graduated, about 15 months later, I was so amped up and convinced the world needed to hire me. And this is at a
Mhm.
period, wasn't too much longer after, I think it was 1976, there was something Ben Bagdickian wrote called Woodstein U. This is after Watergate, where there were as many
Mhm.
people in journalism school as there were people working for newspapers. So it was impossible to get a job, right? So
Mhm.
you had to start somewhere. I was writing letters all up and down the East Coast to newspapers. I went back to my parents' place in Boston. And I had an interview down outside New York City, and they kind of tossed me back. It was like, well, we wanted to talk to you because you had gone to Northwestern, but you're not quite right for us. And so I kept writing for a little local paper, trying to get some clips, for no money, but just to have something that showed that, I was working. But I was really hungry. I interviewed down the East Coast because this little paper in Norfolk, Virginia, said, well, we'll see you. We'll see you on a Friday afternoon after lunch. They're not going to buy me lunch. So I get there, and they had just fired their Harvard educated cop reporter because they said he couldn't talk to cops. My dad had a hardware store. Our house wasn't too far away from the police station in the little town of Massachusetts where I grew up. I said, I can talk to cops.
Mhm.
So they gave me a tryout. And in 4 days, I wrote 16 stories.
Wow.
Short little stories, but I was an animal.
Yeah.
And the editor looked at me and said, all right, kid, you caused crime. And I remember they asked me during the interview, are you, they read me what they thought of my writing. And it was brutally frank. I remember, this was 1979, and I remember the words. They said, no love of language. It's like, you gotta be kidding me, I love language. But it didn't show in what I had presented to them.
Wow.
And so they asked me, are you aggressive? And I told the story of how I had went to my local newspaper, the Patriot Ledger, outside
Mhm.
of Boston, and written and called, and they weren't responding. And having come from this program at Northwestern, I was so souped up that I said, well, they have to go see me, right? And this is the story I'm telling them in Norfolk as they're asking me, are you at least aggressive if you're not a naturally talented writer?
Mhm.
And I said, well, I'll tell you the story of Mr. Ed Querzoli. He was a managing editor of this paper, the Patriot Ledger, in Quincy, Mass. And I showed up at his door one morning just before 10 o'clock. I didn't have an appointment. And I told his secretary, I just graduated from grad school at Northwestern. I'm from here. I read your paper all my life. My grandmother's read the paper. I'd love to talk to Mr. Querzoli about a job. I stayed the entire day outside his office. And at 5 o'clock, she left and she said, "I'm sorry. I told you he didn't have time. He doesn't have jobs. And you've wasted your time. And I thanked her very much." And I went home. And I was there the next morning at 10 o'clock again.
Wow.
And at 10:15, I was in Mr. Querzoli's office where he told me, "I don't have any jobs." But he said, "But, you know, I hate for someone to stake me out like this. And so here, go talk to this guy." And I talked to his state editor, who told me the same thing. But what I really had was a story to tell down in Norfolk when they asked me, "Are you aggressive?" So I told them the story of what I did. And I just, you know, it was just beautifully told. It was my one shot. And I'll never forget the editor of the paper. She was the managing editor, said, "Well, that doesn't show you'd be aggressive being a reporter. That just shows how badly you needed a job." And I said, "Oh, give me a break." And they did. And they gave me that tryout, and I wrote 16 stories, and I came back. And it was only a half year later that they realized, or another editor realized, that they had never paid me for that week. And so they finally paid me a half year later the giant sum of $225 for that week.
Wow.
Even though I was making $250 a week by then, which was, you know, a huge raise.
Is that newspaper still around?
Yeah, but it's kind of sad what's happened to a lot of newspapers. It was an afternoon newspaper called the Ledger Star where I worked, and then they folded it in the early 80s. They folded it into the morning paper, the Virginian Pilot. And the Virginian Pilot, over the last couple of weeks, they've sold their building. It's going to be like condos, cool condos downtown Norfolk, and they've moved the whole operation on south of Hampton Roads, that big harbor, up into Newport News. So they've consolidated, and so their office is pretty far from where their readers' lives are, and that is perilous.
Yeah,
it's because, you know, the whole economic model has changed, and news organizations, you know, it separated those who had adapted and those who had something people would pay for, and those who hadn't adapted, and those whose readers didn't really, or viewers, their audience, didn't care for what they did enough to make it work. So it's this Darwinian thing happening that would be just sort of a natural thing if it didn't have to do with informing the public of what public business is going on in front of them. So who loses are the people who have a stake in the doings of government and business and everything around them. So it's pretty sad. But it's, you know, you can't say that journalism has suffered. Journalism is as vital as it's ever been. Those who have figured out how to use the tools and the technology are doing spectacular work. And the big ones are getting bigger and better, and the little ones are suffering. That's not great, because it's the communities that aren't represented. It's not just the jobs aren't there.
Yeah, exactly. I remember in 2012, I graduated Penn 2012, and I remember I started seeing all these local patch newspapers, and, you know, they would report on local news, and it was all online, and I was like, oh, this is a cool model. And then I don't know, I haven't been following up on that trend, but eventually I went to Fox 29, and so that's how I ended up back in Philly. And at Fox 29, it was kind of the same thing. We realized how Darwinian it was because, you know, ABC in broadcast news is #1 in Philly. And then everyone's fighting for #2. Like, nobody could dethrone ABC. ABC was just so connected in the community. So everyone's fighting for #2. And NBC, with its Comcast backing, was starting to rise up. They had all the funding. And so when I left Fox 29 in 2014, it was like you could tell that NBC was on the upswing in Philly, that is. You know, local markets are all different. So that was kind of like my little brief, like 1.5 year crash course in journalism. And, you know, it was a very different journey than yours, but I think the parallel for me was that I wanted it bad too. I was like, I want to work in journalism. So when I interned at Fox 29, I guess I was like that go-getter person like you. I would just like work twice as hard, try so much harder. And so it's so funny that like in journalism, when they're hiring, they really look for someone who's like that much of a go-getter. Like it's such an interesting thing that like they ask you about that story. For me, I guess they just saw me every day as an intern. I just like never sat around, and like it really impressed them. So, you know, for everyone thinking about journalism, at least the traditional model, that's something you really have to show people who are, potentially going to hire you. You got to show them you want to follow the story. You want to help tell the story. I think that's one of my lessons.
I mean, I think you're exactly right. I think that this is, sort of calm self-assurance doesn't necessarily get the job done. You may not get in the door. You may not get through the door. You may not stay because you need, they work you pretty relentlessly in journalism.
Yeah.
I mean, you just take a look at what we've done since the beginning of March when the virus started, followed by the protests and everything. Most people have been sprinting at a marathon length. We have, without any relief, and you need people who are built that way to do the work. Until, unless you get very fortunate, the work doesn't pay great. But what it is it gives you, a lot of reps. It gives you an incredible opportunity to see, the world as it's happening, and the privilege of reporting on it to others. If you're, journalism, I'm trying to think of why they look for self-starters that way. It's one of the few kinds of work where people at the bottom level, the reporters, have so much power and trust. You have to trust them. You empower them to sort of tell you what's going on, because the editors, by and large, are not outside. They're inside, sort of coming up with strategies to sort of harness the work the best that they can. Mm-hmm. And you need people who are self-starters. Yeah. You need people who are resilient. You need people who, and this is like one of the great secrets of why it works economically. Most of us who do journalism are, racked with self-doubt and need every day to do it again and somehow, do it better and have another shot to redeem ourselves, even if the work was perfectly fine. We're just built that way. And so we're sort of perfect employees that will just sort of keep coming for not all that much reward other than an occasional good boy.
Yeah. And the reason I quit at Fox 29, I don't think I ever told them this, but the reason I quit was because literally I wasn't given enough of that like, okay, just do a little bit more. Like, I was exactly like you described. If I didn't write a story well enough, I would feel like I was a failure. And then I didn't get enough freedom just to go and kind of like do more of that. Because, the thing about Fox 29, I think a lot of whether it's papers, online publications, whatever, they're trying to run as lean as possible. So sometimes you just feel like you're doing three people's work. So because you're doing three people's work, your quality goes down. And so I just felt like I could never get to the quality. Like, it's okay if you work me hard, just give me time to like get my writing slightly higher up in quality. And that wasn't like an ability thing, it was just a time thing. And like, if only they just did that, I think I probably would still be at the station. So it's like exactly like you said, we have this internal drive to write well, to tell the story. And if you don't allow journalists to do that, they're not going to be with you. You can pay them really bad, like you said. You can treat them pretty bad, give them a good boy once in a while, but like, make sure they can tell their story. That's why they're journalists.
That's the reward, is being able to do the work. And if you can find someone who has the time, and time is, you put your finger on what it is, it's time, which is money. But if you have the time, if you're in a place where the editor has the time to teach, it's all the difference in the world. Because it's you're getting paid to learn. It's much better than school for this. This is the perfect way to do it. And when I started out, I was lucky in that local papers were making money, 20-30% profits. It was unbelievable, the monopolies they had in some towns, and in advertising, they controlled everything. And so they were thickly staffed, and people had time, and the editors taught you in ways that prepared me for when I finally got to Philly, having made a stop in Louisville, Kentucky, where the editing was really good. I knew what I was doing, and I had worked with great editors, so nobody had to look after me. So one of the, you started off at Fox 29 here in Philly. That's the big time. I started off in a minor league, a AAA town, and then went to another AAA town before coming to the majors. They happened to be AAA baseball teams in those towns. So but Philly, is is the big time. And at the big time, they don't necessarily have the time to teach unless you get really lucky or unless they've got a wonderful program. You're pretty much on your own.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was, that's a little, and, so I was fortunate that way, because back then there was the time for someone to say, all right, well, let's look at how you did it and how you really could have done it to make it better. And then, you don't need to be told that more than once. And if you do, you probably, you if you can't learn pretty quickly that way, you should do something else, because it can be grueling.
Yeah. Tell me about the Louisville experience. Like, how did the editors help you out and stuff like that? I'm really curious, because that's honestly something I really never got at Fox 29. I had to really learn on my own, especially once I got hired. It's like when I was an intern, people sat down with me and like when I approached them, they would teach me. Once I got hired, it's like, oh, you're one of the employees now. Screw you. You got to be in this dog-eat-dog culture. The culture at Fox 29 was really not good when I was there. I think it's gotten better. But so tell me about Louisville.
Well, so I was in Norfolk for 5 years, and I had, played through. I'd been in the feature staff. I had covered politics, the General Assembly at the very end. I had sort of done starting from police, fire, and rock music all the way to, to everything. I did investigative reporting on the Navy down in Norfolk, but I still felt that while I had learned to write, and I really had, I had holes in my reporting. So I went to a very deliberate newspaper that was called the Louisville Courier-Journal. And back then it wasn't owned as it is now by Gannett, which is the giant newspaper company. It was owned by this family of sort of progressive, Harvard-educated Kentuckians called the Binghams, who had a lot of money they put in, and the paper had won a lot of Pulitzer Prizes for very ambitious things. And the quality of editing was, they were so serious about what they did that it helped me over 3 years sort of fill in those holes. I knew what to do. I knew how never to take shortcuts. I knew how to show my work. I just got myself ready for the sort of top rung paper that I had aspired to out of Norfolk and couldn't get to. I had applied to Philly. I had applied to the Washington Post, and it was an editor at the Washington Post after 2 days of interviews who said, go to Louisville. And, that's our biggest alumni club had been at that paper. And, that's what you should do. It just turns out at the end, I was more interested in the style of paper that Philly was, which was funkier. It was looser. It was a little more, it was just everything I wanted to be. It was this sort of Oz where you had all sorts of quirky talent, and it was a humane place, which was important to me, because the work outside the room is really hard. And so you want the environment in the room to be nurturing and supportive and fun and appreciative. Yeah. And Philly was that.
Wow, that's great.
And that was kind of rare.
Yeah.
This was also 1988 when I got here, and there were about 600 reporters or journalists at the Inquirer. There are 210 now. We are much smaller. And what we do is, much more efficient than we did. But it's still interesting. 32 years later, I still every morning wake up and say, boy, what are we going to do today? It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So, tell me about that transition from just being a journalist to then working the editing desk. How was that?
Well, I mean, that's, you're still being a journalist, obviously, but I think the Penn part helped, because I was used to working with bright young people whose work I could make better, and I could help them kind of realize what they're going for. Everybody needs an editor, including editors. Your work just gets better when someone else looks at it and can't see what was, when you look at something, you can see what was in your head, what you were thinking, what you're trying to represent. But when someone looks at it cold on a screen or a piece of paper, it's, sometimes it's missing that which you think you've got in there, because you've got a picture in your head of what was there. So having a cold reader and being a good cold reader is it's essential to make sure you're doing what you're hoping and trying to do. So, I mean, I started off and it was frustrating, because I had been a columnist. I got to write in my own sort of most distinct way for several years. And in the very beginning, I think I wanted to make too much stuff like mine or put my own stamp on it. And I think it took a good year. And, you know, I thank some of the reporters who put up with me, for me to realize that my job isn't to, you know, I've had a real good long shot at putting my stamp on everything. My job here is to sort of pull back, try to figure out what they're trying to do, try to, if I buy it, if I'm with it, try to make that the best version of that possible, and make it seem like what I've done is invisible. And that takes a lot of sort of, you know, I think the hardest thing is is not being an egotist.
Yeah.
And I think being a columnist is all about being an egotist, particularly in a time when, you know, you're encouraged to grow your social media audience to the point where you're a brand.
Yeah.
So I wound up editing The Columnist, and I knew completely what they need to do to be able to sort of sustain that high wire act of 2 times a week. They would write, you know, what they reported and felt under deadline pressure. You know, so I think the best work I did was editing 2 of those columnists for several years, because I knew just what they were going through. And I was, you know, trying to come up with ideas for them when they didn't have one, but also just trying to let them know that, yeah, I know this is really hard work and you're doing great, because that's really what you need to hear when you're doing it. It's a confidence game. Yeah. So I grew up, and the editing helped me do that to the point where it didn't always have to be about me, because I was rewarded for being me. And then that's not the system anymore when you become an editor. And I think I did make that transition. But it's, you know, it's an adult pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. I have kind of like a parallel analogy right now going on, because, you know, I have one big YouTube channel called Fight Commentary Breakdowns, and I've been helping people build their YouTube channels, kind of just, you know, my close friends, right? I want all my close friends to be able to do what I do, because they're all very talented. And in many ways, they're more talented than me at martial arts, even though I have the big martial arts channel. So I have to struggle with that sometimes. I want to steer their channel one way, kind of like an editor. After all, no, it's their channel. I'm helping them. I'm nurturing them. But no. You do it like you have the vibe you do. Like, I have to always step back and be like, no. This is their channel. Let them, like, you know, they should follow what works. But besides that, like, do it whatever way you want. Don't, like, become another Jerry. And so, like, it's so funny that I have, like, that parallel, but in the YouTube space.
I mean, you deliver something into the world, it then belongs to the world, and it's got a life of its own. And it is sometimes just not what you thought it was going to be. Yeah. And sometimes it's just, you know, better. And sometimes it's not as good. Yeah. And then, you know, then you do another one. Yeah. Then you figure out what your next channel is. Yeah. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, let's say someone happens to watch this. They're watching for the first time, and they're kind of wondering what this is a part of. Yeah. So what is your idea? Like, why would you want to talk to me about what I do? What is this a piece of?
I started under the lockdown. I realized, all right, so a lot of people are going to just be, you know, like lost in life. Especially students, right? I'm still in touch with some, like, students. A lot of students are going to not have that kind of nurturing kind of mentorship that I kind of had, some people really had. And I just said, why don't I create a channel where it's like, if a student's lost, or even a young adult, or even someone who's, let's say, 40 and out of work because this economy is going to create that, why don't they come and just, like, hear conversations with different people from different industries? Because I know once I started discovering that this type of stuff was available, it helped me a lot. So I'm like, I want to be a channel that helps people a lot, because I do love listening to people and learning from people. So it was just kind of a natural offshoot of what I already did, because I had a channel where I would do this, but that channel kind of strayed. It became more like me roasting people. And I'm done with that phase now in my life. So I was like, all those really cool interviews got buried behind me, like, you know, being funny. So it's like, how do I take what worked and is long-term something I love doing, and, like, move it to a different channel so the brands don't get meshed, so to speak? So that's kind of a maybe a long answer, but that is the answer to why I created.
I like that. I have, you know, I've got 2 sons who are 31 years old. Both, one is not working right now, came out of a program graduating right into the beginning of this. The other had to fire like his entire team and do all their work, physical work, and for a little less pay. And it is, this is very real and very useful to sort of realize, this is a time to kind of retool a little bit, think a little bit about what you're doing and figure out what you'd like to do next, even if the opportunities that were there, change as a result of, the pandemic, the protests, the economic disruption, all of which will likely go on for quite a bit longer. And also, as I told one of the guys, this is a long game. This is a long road. Look, my dad is 94. My mom is 92. We're hopefully the genes are such that this is going to be going on a long time. So take your time and don't feel this need to go, do something rash and go take something. Just think a little bit about what is it you'd like to do and what you can do, and spend a lot of time. I think you're right. Listening to other people and their stories and wondering what I can learn from that, or what I don't want to do as a result from that, what I do want to do. I think stuff like this is useful, and particularly talking to people who've just had sort of, who've done things intensely but fairly quietly. I'm not interviewed a lot anymore. I was when I was a columnist. So these stories feel kind of fresh to me, and they're the ones that sort of stick.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that emerged, and I never planned on this, but Joe Rogan, who does a lot of these talks, he's moving to Spotify. So I know from a marketing standpoint, there's going to be a big void as he leaves YouTube forever, maybe forever. I don't know, but he's going to leave YouTube for good for a little bit. So, I know Tim Ferriss and stuff does talks like this, but like Joe Rogan's the biggest guy that talks to people, and learns from them. So Joe Rogan's leaving in I think less than a month, he's going to be gone. So
unless you listen to Spotify when you walk your dog every morning, which I do.
Yeah. But so it's like he's moving to Spotify for a reason, and maybe it's like he knows he's going to capture an even bigger audience on there. But I know there are people who, like, one of the reasons why one of my YouTube channels blew up was because people would listen to YouTube on their phones when driving and stuff like that. And maybe Spotify and other platforms have more captured that audience, but part of me thinks that audience is not completely gone yet, just because YouTube is such an ecosystem, and like people get a lot of what they need on YouTube. Although, being devil's advocate, if you look at the numbers for when this lockdown started happening, because YouTube was doing certain things with their algorithm, aka trying to push certain news too hard, I think the traffic on YouTube's actually gone down. People are just tired. Like they want to get what they want to get, but instead they're getting pushed certain narratives. So that's an interesting thing to think about too, for people who are kind of thinking about trends and all that.
For whatever I search for on YouTube, I keep getting live Allman Brothers concerts from the mid-'70s. I don't know why. They must have figured me out.
Yeah.
They must know what I'm really searching for.
I love Allman Brothers too, man. So, I wish they recommended me some Allman Brothers.
That was the Great American Band in my time.
Yeah.
Just like suddenly they're playing John Coltrane. I said, who are these Southern boys?
Yep.
Pretty damn good.
Wow, that's so cool. I haven't talked about the Allman Brothers since high school. So for viewers, if you don't know the Allman Brothers, I'm going to put a Wikipedia entry to that.
And put a link to the Live at the Fillmore 1971. You might want to start off with In Memory of Elizabeth Reed, and then come back for Whip and Post.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna write this down right now. Live at the Fillmore Allman Brothers.
71.
Yeah, cool, man. This is great. Allman Brothers, man. I probably haven't even listened to the Allman Brothers in 2 years. So YouTube, man, where's your algorithm going? I like the Allman Brothers.
Well, you listen to my calls. But now it's going to be every time. It's going to show up for you on the right every time you get onto YouTube, because now it's heard you.
Now it's heard me.
Google's pretty smart about that stuff. Right? They're already loading it right now, even though you probably haven't posted anything yet on this. They're
totally.
They're reading your mail.
Yeah, they're reading the mail. They're listening on the phone because I have the Gmail app and stuff like that. So, yeah.
You're either comfortable with that or you're uncomfortable with that. Yeah. When you're a columnist, you kind of unearth every bit of your emotional life and your past for material. So I'm totally comfortable with it. I don't care. It's like there's nothing I have to hide, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But there really isn't. He qualifies a little bit. So, I'm cool with it.
Yeah.
Even though I know Alexa right now is like going through my my bookshelf or something.
Yeah. 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 I think it was maybe 2005 or no, not 2005, 2006 or 2007 when everyone started going on Facebook and there were privacy concerns, right? And
Oh, yeah.
I think in my mind I knew where the world was going. I'm like, one day everything's going to be tracked. And I remember I made this deal with maybe God or whatever. I was like, yeah, I got nothing to hide, so just track me. I guess I'm one of those people. I don't have nothing to hide. Okay, do your thing, track me. I know
Yeah.
from a civil liberties and stuff standpoint, that's probably a worrisome way to think, but I was just like, there's nothing I can do. Got nothing to hide. Okay.
Well, it's you're more at peace if you feel that way, because the stuff is all it's been harvested. It's out there. God knows what it's being chopped up and sold for, and who it's being sold to, and for what purposes. And we're not making anything off it, even if others are.
Yeah.
But I don't. It doesn't trouble me as much as the change in the weather.
Yeah.
Climate change I worry about. That I don't worry about as much. One is reversible. The other, God, I hope.
Exactly. So why don't we talk about like some topics that you really love?
Well, I can tell you that I have. We stopped the I-Team back that second week of March and had all of us go to a couple different desks. We went either to the business desk to talk about the way the economy is going to be radically, hammered by the virus, or the health desk. And so I've been editing coronavirus stories nonstop since March, a little after March 11th. And congratulations, Los Angeles, for being the new epicenter. You should feel proud for what you're doing out there. Is that everybody like in bars? What's going on out there?
Yeah, everyone's in bars. Basically, I think the unfortunate thing was LA's a special city because there's so many actors here. So the lockdown really hit the city hard. I think in the U.S. it's probably hovering around like 20 to 30% unemployment. LA is probably like, when the lockdown happened, it was probably like at least 50%, because all these working actors, they're only paid, besides landing a gig if they're lucky, is like waiting tables and stuff like this. So basically you took away the entire Hollywood economy. So I think LA had to open up. And so they did. When the restrictions got loosened, what you started seeing was a lot of bars, especially in the cities that really got hit by the looting. They had to just be like, okay, we're distancing. Sure, just come on in. So people weren't distancing in a lot of these like restaurants and bars. And I kind of don't blame them, because those bars probably very likely would have just gone under if they didn't just allow everyone in instead of being at like 40% capacity.
Yeah, and alcohol is a big threat to social distancing. All it wants to do is make you closer. So that's I see that there are some states that are banning bars now because they know that that's part of the problem. Here, you haven't been able, in Pennsylvania, you haven't been able to go into a bar since it happened. We peaked about April, around the old tax day, around April 15th, in the Philly area in the suburbs. And we had been flat and decreasing until the last couple of days, and we're trying to figure out what's going on. It isn't the protests, which have been pretty intense here, but it's the counties are green again, and we'll see what happens. So that's what I've been doing. I've been editing 3 science writers, sort of the intense, hardcore science writers.
Wow.
One of them just wrote today about these couple of professors at Bucknell University who've been going to Uganda and bringing back like bat intestines to study bats, because bats, they thought of as the transmitter of the virus, and they somehow don't get sick. So what is it about them that allows them to survive this, but yet absorb so much of it? So from hardcore science like that to stories about the philosophy, how masks became a sort of a political issue, even though the science writers sort of would have thought it would have been a public health issue, to those kinds of stories, to then editing stories of sort of what it was like in the ICUs when the wave, the surge hit, and the healthcare providers were sort of, exhausted and overwhelmed without nearly enough personal protective equipment, and what they've learned. And so now, we're still just doing virus stories.
Mm-hmm.
100, I think Tuesday was our 100th day in isolation. So we have 210 journalists. All of us are at our own homes. We meet on Zoom a couple times a day. Sometimes it feels like we live on Zoom, and we are just doing everything we can to document, how it's going. And then, of course, the protests after the police killing of George Floyd changed everything.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like in your town, but every night here, and I notice it's around 8:46, which is a symbolic amount of time, the fireworks start around here.
Yeah,
and they go
exactly.
on
Same
all
here.
night long.
Yeah.
And do yours start at 8:46? I mean, that was at 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The officer was on his neck. It seems to be that's a very intentional time.
It seems to start here. The only difference between what you're describing and what I'm describing is that the fireworks don't last the whole night. And I think part of it is because LA is a much more spread out place. So it's hard for people to hear it. Like in Philly, it's like probably the whole city hears the fireworks. Right here, it's like a city will hear a firework, but LA is just so freaking big. So there's not going to be like, oh, I hear it, let's do it. It's like, oh, I might remember it's 8:46. Oh, maybe I'll let out a firework.
Yeah. So it's and I'm 1 mile from the city line here, and you can hear it. Just south of me, you can hear it. East of me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm surrounded on a couple of sides by the city. It's miles away. It's pretty intense, and
Wow.
it's going on for a while. So, so that's what I've been. Those are the kinds of stories I've been doing. Some protest stories, more virus stories, but it's So tonight, I am working from 3 p.m. I've got a couple hours till 11 p.m. as the night editor. So I'm going to be the guy responsible for whatever's happening from now until close to midnight, and it'll be in our Sunday paper, and it'll be online at Inquirer.com.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows? It'll be I don't know what's going to be happening. There are a few protests that are planned for earlier in the day. We'll have reporters out covering it. We'll have editors dealing with them until, I take over. But I'm kind of like the catcher at this point, just sort of watching the field and making sure, that everything is buttoned down and just respond to the news. I have no idea what the night will be like. All I know is that I'll be doing it in the comfort of my home with the dog at my feet and the patience of my wife. Yeah.
Nice. Wow. It's so interesting how journalism's changed for good too in this modern era. It's like Zoom and being able to work from home, the good and the bad from that. But man, just hearing how it's changed.
You've got two very different experiences. You've got those of us who can work from home.
Yeah.
And then you got the reporters who are going out in hazmat suits, depending on what's going on. I mean, we've had photographers who have been hit. We've had reporters who have been arrested. Wow. We've had reporters who've been tear gassed. Most of this coming at the hands of police in the middle of big protests. But it's very intense. And we're having hazardous environment training and trauma sort of therapy afterward, which is great that they're doing it because, I had that when I had the hostile environment training before I went into the Middle East as a reporter. And it was really useful because the only experience I had was playing like high school hockey, which helped. Yeah. But otherwise, how to survive a crowd at a bombing is something that you want to get a little bit of instruction in. And we've been doing that here. And so their experience of the people out in the street is, exhausting, emotionally exhausting. Wow. And those of us who are working, I work across from the refrigerator next to the coffee pot. So I can my life is a lot more sedentary and calm. And there are aspects of it that are very pleasant. Mm-hmm. For the reporters, the burden is really fallen on them. So we have to be extra sensitive to their experiences, their emotions, their fatigue, just the turbulence of what we're asking them to do. And we have to be really thoughtful about when to send them out and when to say, you don't need to go do that.
Yeah.
And to listen when they don't want to do it, because it's, they're putting themselves at risk a lot more than normal.
Exactly.
And everywhere you go, there's potential poison out there. There's a virus out there. So it's very different and very serious.
Yeah. From like a traffic angle, have you seen web traffic go up for the Philadelphia Inquirer?
Oh, yeah. So we made everything free when the virus first started as a public service. We've kind of rolled that back a little bit because we had to, because we've lost our advertising largely. We don't have events that we were starting to make money on. We have them virtual, but we're not charging for them. But because everybody was glued around the news, whether it's TV or local, and we're the biggest local operation by far, we were just, we redistributed 210 journalists to just cover the change that this virus was causing around here, and to try to put out as much information from service journalism to investigative journalism to explanatory journalism to just sort of show what's going on. Our traffic has gone up, and we're much higher sort of jump in our digital only subscriptions, and it is helping, but we're down quite a large percentage in revenue than where we thought we were going to be, and we're already pretty lean. Yeah.
I think I'm experiencing some of that right now on YouTube too, because I was doing pretty well, but I'm sort of down now too with a lot of my revenue too. It's just this world. It just like, things are changing rapidly.
It's a long game.
Yeah.
We're going to recover.
Yeah.
Don't look at your bank account.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just try to, just realize that you've got now, in a weird way, you got a gift of time to go do something. If you need to tweak something, you need to reinvent yourself, if you need to try something different, it's sort of a perfect time for that.
Yeah.
If you can, survive financially, and if you don't have to, if you have the luxury of not having to go out every day among the masses who are not as careful with their masks. It's a luxury I have. My wife is just retired as a teacher. She doesn't have to go out. She's not working at the bookstore where she had been because it's a little dangerous for her. But we have that luxury. If you have a little luxury and you have a little gift of time, people can think a little bit about what is it that I want to readjust in my life. This is an opportunity if you're so fortunate.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk briefly about being an adjunct professor at Penn. Tell me how you landed that and like what you got from that.
Well, it was a position that former Inquirer reporters and editors had. So there's one job in the urban studies department that teaching one course called urban journalism, because we're in the middle of a city. So one of my colleagues, Dan Biddle, had to go take some time off because he was writing a book about Octavius Catto. Luckily, it took him 7 years. And so I had that job, during all that time, and then for a couple more years afterwards, I kept doing it, and then gave it back to him actually after 10 years. It was like, I'm going to borrow the job for 10 years. My very first year, I remember talking, being a little impressed by the students. There was this one kid who was an economics major, who I asked him to write, go interview the kid sitting behind you. Not the kid sitting next to you, because that could likely be your friend, but the kid sitting behind you. It was a trick that another friend of mine who taught in the med school there told me. He said, try it this way. Yeah. And, interviewed him for 15 minutes, wrote something up, and what I read suggested that this kid, an economics major, had been reading for 40 years. It was so fluid, so cool. He's actually a reporter who went right to the New York Times from Penn and has never left. He's in the DC bureau, a kid named Matt Flegenheimer. I thought everybody was going to be that talented. Turns out he was a little bit of a unicorn. But there were lots of kids who were incredibly talented. The Wharton students were really interesting because they were so sort of task oriented. All right, I want you to go to that SEPTA transportation platform and interview 20 people. And so it's like, yes, just go do it. there were kids, there was a math major who just thought it would be a challenge to get an A in a course that he had no sort of background in. And he did. He was a very bright kid. And it's kind of funny because, you know, a couple of them, you'd identify the talent. You'd think, you know, you'd really be good doing this. And you kind of, they might be a senior. It was always the second semester of the year. So their seniors are going to graduate. I remember asking one who had just this beautiful natural talent, you know, what he thought he was going to do. And he had a job at Lazard Frere in New York for probably 5 times what I make. And I'm thinking, all right, you're good. It's cool. So I taught, I had one year where I taught Tiffany Trump and her best friend, Samantha Cohen, the daughter of Michael Cohen, the former attorney. I don't know what their relationship is now. That was a very Penn experience. Mm-hmm. I had just a range of, you know, sort of high achieving students who I had a 30-year head start on. And so as much as they could do, as much as they knew, you know, I knew a bit more. Yeah. And got a chance to sort of stretch them and take them out of their comfort zone. So with Penn, what I told all of them was, my job is for you to go find stories. I'm going to run this like I'm a city editor, and, you know, you're all my reporters. And there's one rule I have, is that I need you to penetrate the food truck line. You know how outside on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, there are food trucks from all different countries around there? I said, I want your stories to be on the food truck line. You got to go out into the community. You got to go into University City, into West Philadelphia, into Center City, South, North. And I want you to find stories from people who aren't used to talking to people. And you're going to say, hey, I'm a student at the University of Pennsylvania. And they're going to be like, who cares? You're going to convince them to tell you their story, to trust you with their story. Wow. And that's not, I mean, if I come as I'm saying the Philadelphia Inquirer, maybe they know what that is, and they're going to talk because they can kind of see. Sometimes they'll ask me, what time is that going to be aired? And I'm like, no, we're not a TV show. It's like the newspaper. And like, what? Yeah. So the skills they develop, talking to people cold, building relationships, building trust, I don't know what they're going to do with it. You know, some of them became journalists. There's another guy who works for NPR. But I hope they all got something out of it about reading people, talking to people, communicating clearly. And I loved it. And after 10 years, my job changed at the paper, and it got a department to run, and it was going to take too much time. And I didn't love grading papers. So I said, all right, that's it. 10 years is good. Yeah. So I gave it up.
Wow. Wow, that's so interesting that it's like it started as like a temporary thing, and then it became a 10-year temporary thing because your friend took, you know, 7 years to write his book. It's just so funny how life just like gives you random like segues and stuff like that.
And he just picked it up just like he had been doing it all along. I came back to his class to guest sort of join in, and I talked for 3 hours, which is astonishing. I kind of, you know, one thing you like about teaching that never happens in life, except if you're interviewed, which doesn't happen all that often, is that you get to talk and you get to tell a story, and people get to either listen or turn the page. Yeah. Hopefully they listen.
Exactly. I've only since kind of like taking my YouTube journey, I've only given like 2 or 3 talks, but yeah, I know exactly how you feel. It's like, wow, people actually find what I say interesting. Oh my God. You know, talking to either young people, like people who seek advice, it's pretty funny. So yeah, I know that feeling. And it's like, you're like, wow, I didn't even know I could talk for an hour or 2 hours, or in your case, 3 hours.
Yeah, that one was a little much, but you know, it was a conversation, and you know, he's such a great interviewer himself that we just kept it rolling, and we had an audience. We had students who were like, you know, who had their snacks, and they were bunkered in for the 3 hours. And I don't even think we took a break. Wow. I was exhausted after that.
So. Wow. I think you mentioned this earlier, but it might be a good thing to kind of like talk more about. So the day in the life of you, like when you get up, is like your phone filled with news apps? How does a senior editor kind of like, what is the day in the life of a senior editor?
Well, so one thing I've got going for me is that at 7 o'clock every morning, I put out this newsletter on an app called Nuzzle, NUZZEL.com. And so I have been gathering overnight, and when I wake up in the morning before 7, sort of going through my Twitter feed, I'm going through Nuzzle itself, I'm reading, all sorts of different sites to figure out what would be 10 sort of, what's a great variety of stuff that sort of covers the world in the last 24 hours. So I'm already thinking about that for my own little private newsletter, because I was the paper's first blogger, full-time blogger back in 2005, I think it was, for almost 2 years. And so I've always been the aggregator, the guy who goes out and reads and pulls together sort of a vision of what's going on and sifts through it, curates it, and then sort of embroiders it a little bit with my own sort of stitching. So it's something I've done and like doing. And I've done it ever since Berlin, where I needed to do it when I was, sort of away from, I was sort of living on my computer. So that's 7 o'clock, and then I go out and the dog's got to be walked. We've got a combination Bouvier Irish Wolfhound. She's 2 years old, a big, beautiful rescue. So she gets like a 45-minute walk. So I'm listening to NPR, or I'm listening to a podcast, or I'm listening to the Daily, the New York Times. So I'm, there's every moment already I'm like taking stuff in. And by the time I come back and put on coffee, I have been absorbing the news for about 2 hours.
Wow.
And at 8:15, we have a Zoom call in which we talk about what's going on for the day. And then we have a sort of a health staff Zoom call at about 9:30. And then we have conversations with the reporters, refining what we might be working on, coming up with sort of strategies for what are we going to do this day. And then the day just sort of continues like that till about, I have one more meeting about what's going to be posted the rest of the day online and what's going to be in the papers. And at about 2 o'clock, I take the dog out again, and I just do a head clearing 45-minute, it's lovely in the summer, walk around the neighborhood. I am not listening to news at this point. I am newsed out. I am, I'm listening to the Alma Brothers, 1971, or I'm listening to jazz or anything. Bill Evans, Miles Davis, usually. And then I'm back, and then I'm, strapped back in, and the stories come in and we're editing. And sometimes it takes till like last night, Friday night, I had a story. It came in at about 6:45. So that's a long day. I mean, I'm a quarter in the story. That was the story about the research on the bats that I talked about earlier. And the story was, near perfect and didn't need much of me other than moving one sentence around and taking out an extraneous period. He put two. I mean, it was so beautifully done. And so that's a long day. Afterwards, I kind of look up at my wife, and it's like, all right, I think I am done. And she's, distrustful because it's never really done that way. But I'm at that point, I try to log off as best I can. But here's the best deal. Starting Monday and all this week, I'm off. I am on vacation, and I'm going to try to read a book, an actual book on paper as opposed to on my Kindle or on my phone, so I don't get distracted by work or emails or, it won't be the baseball scores, will it?
Wow. It's interesting because one thing I'm learning from you already, and it's going to segue into kind of like a talk about work-life balance, but I'm learning from you already that you give yourself time blocks, and it seems to revolve around walking the dog, where it's like, okay, I'm just going to tune off. This is the time to de-stress. I think that's really important for especially a person like you who has a very packed schedule every day. Every day has such turnarounds.
Yeah, I've got to build these windows in, and very rarely do I miss them. Very rarely does something so big happen that's so pressing at the time that I have to shift it around, because it allows me to do it. And the other thing is that I need a lot of sleep. I'll go to bed pretty early to be able to do all that. But it's, we lived in Germany for 3 years. And the Germans had pretty firm divisions between work time and play time. I mean, just really divided. Very different from Americans who, we were kind of engaged all the time and would be happy to work all the time. And the problem with being at home is that you can work, there's no commute. Well, it's a very small commute downstairs. And as a result, there's all this time to work, and the work is, we've got a pandemic. We've got incredibly disruptive social issues that need to be, that are need to be paid attention to and fixed and covered and thought about and written about. There's so much work to be done that it's not like, we say this because we're committed to the mission. That's another reason, how you select a journalist, someone who really does think that what they're doing matters. But, there's an opportunity to work 14 hours a day, every day for 100 days. The problem is that your body can't take it. And so I'm forcing myself to be off for a week. And there's so much going on. We're shifting teams again, and I'm going to start doing some of the investigative stuff again with a couple of reporters. But I'm going to take a week off before. And there's a story everybody wants them to do right away, and I could be involved in. I can have meetings this week, and I'm going to just try to figure out how I can let someone else do that so I can have 1 week to recharge my batteries.
Mm-hmm.
Because they got to be recharged.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I worked in journalism back in the day, that's when I really appreciated vacations. When I had vacations, I was like, wow. Woo!
So the question's going to be, what am I going to do in my week off?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go to the dining room. I haven't been in the dining room in a long time. I mean, that's about, what am I going to do? I can't go anywhere.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to chill out. I'm going to do some gardening.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got, there's some, it's been kind of nice watching the seasons. We live in an old gardener's cottage from the 1870s. And it's kind of down on a creek, and there's a lot of really good soil, because it kind of flows down. And so lots of things grow, including weeds. So, I'll be doing some weeding.
Nice.
That's where you can find me next week.
Nice. Wow. I think this is a good stopping point. And for viewers that watch, there's so much about Daniel's life that we still haven't talked about, like, when he was in Germany and stuff like that. But if you guys want him back, I'm sure Daniel, even if viewers don't explicitly say they want you back, they want you back. The majority of viewers are silent people. They don't talk. And I have this habit of I'll give them something to talk about. So I'll purposely have something in the background. I don't do that here, but sometimes I'll purposely have something in the background just to get the viewers who usually don't talk to say something. But I didn't do it in this video. But the point is, I know viewers will want you back. So Daniel, I would love to bring you back in the future. One day, maybe I'll take a trip back to Philly, visit some of my friends, and maybe I'll sit down with you. It would be so cool to kind of meet you in person.
By then, we'll be allowed to go out of the house, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so, because people keep talking about second wave and stuff like that. So you really never know with stuff like this. It could, like the Spanish. I almost don't want to call it that. The 1918 flu pandemic lasted 3 years, so it's just got to be prepared right now.
And it came back with a wicked vengeance too.
Yeah.
The second wave on that one was the deadly one. So,
yeah, exactly.
This one's deadly enough. Let's hope one of those 100+ different vaccine programs that are trying to come up with something. Let's hope they come up with something.
Yeah.
Soon.
Exactly.
All right. Next time we'll talk about how I snuck into the Balkans at the end of Milosevic. There are all sorts of stories out there.
Oh, yes. Great little trailer teaser for the next talk.
It's a true story. All right. Thank you so much for having me, and let me know if I can where I can watch this one day. All right.
Definitely.
Send me a link.
And for viewers watching, I will put all the links, all the stuff we talked about. There's going to be links in the description and pinned comments. You guys can follow along.
Hey, I got to sell my newsletter. Got to put a link to my newsletter in there so people can get a free 10 stories a day to just sort of see the world the way, I'm looking at it. So.
Exactly. Yeah. So please link that.
All right. Thanks now.